Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the annual Retail and E-Commerce Lunch with Pro Manchester. Today's event will be hosted by Kat from Grayling, and I'm going to introduce Kat, and she's going to introduce herself and take over in a moment. But I just want to say one, thank you to all for joining us, and also thank you to all of our speakers and panellists that will be taking part in the really interesting discussion we've got ahead of today. And also a final thank you to our sponsors, Manchester Metropolitan University, Virgin Money. Now, before Kat comes on and introduces herself, can I just introduce the video from Virgin Money?
Hi, I'm Dior and I'm from Glasgow. I'm pretty new to the Virgin Money Red team, however I have to say I'm loving being a part of it, getting to answer all of your questions and work along some really lovely people. That makes my job a lot easier.
Hi, my name is Graham. I live in Lincolnshire and work in the bank's Nottingham office. I've worked for Virgin Money for the last 17 years, 7 of which have been within the health and social care team. And what I absolutely love is helping people to grow their business.
Hi, I'm Hannah and I'm in Bolton. During the coronavirus, I've been asked to come and help out on the Red team to see if we can help answer any of your questions that you've sent in to us. Part of my day job is going out to customers in their business premises, seeing what they do and seeing how we can help them to grow and expand their businesses.
Hi, I'm Oliver. I live in Chesterfield on the edge of the Peak Park with my family. Most of my day is taken up supporting the team of relationship managers that I look after in the south of the country, who indeed in turn look after their customers.
I've been with the bank for around 7 years, starting off as a tailor and working my way into the business segment. So that's why I'm on hand here to answer your questions. I do have a bit of experience in the field and I'm enjoying being able to help you as much as I can.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sam, for that introduction, and thank you all for joining us today. It goes without saying that retail has been one of the sectors that probably has had the most challenging, interesting, and I'm going to say the word unprecedented. I said I wasn't going to say it, but unprecedented year in 2020. So I hope you're able to join us for the full session this lunchtime. It is quite a packed agenda, so we're going to be kicking off with some insights, setting the scene for kind of what we saw last year, but also what are the opportunities and what might 2021 look like. We've got then our first panel discussion, which will be 30 minutes, which is all around kind of how technology has played such a transformative role within the pandemic, not only in retail, but obviously for all of us. Even doing this event, I'm sure we all probably would have rather been in a lovely hotel having these discussions, but here we are in 2021 in another lockdown. We are then going to have a short break, so hopefully if you're able to join for the session, you can grab a coffee or a quick bite, and we'll come back after that break at 1:05 to look at our second panel, which will talk much more around kind of what do we see as the future for our towns and city centres in the region. And finally, I'm delighted to say, to wrap up today's retail event, we've got Craig Noonan joining us from the Co-op to talk about, how has it been being one of the essential retailers, keeping us well stocked and fed during a year like no other. So I'm not going to do a huge amount of talking, but just to introduce myself, as Sam said, I'm Kat McGettigan. I head up the Manchester team for Grayling Communications. So we're an international communications agency working with clients across many sectors, but retail is both a real personal and professional passion of mine. So I'm delighted to be able to host the session today. As Sam said, if you want to ask any questions, there is a Q&A box, and I'll be introducing the speakers and panels as we go along. So I'll give them a full introduction then, but we've got a really exciting selection of varied businesses and people involved in the retail and e-commerce section. So I'm sure you'll come away with lots of great insight and hopefully a feeling of maybe, shall I say, cautious optimism, particularly for the second half of the year. So to start off, I'm going to hand over to Diane Well from Springboard, and she's very much going to take us through some of the trends and insights that we've seen across retail last year, but also what are the predictions she's looking at for 2021. So Diane, if I can hand over to you, Diane's going to have about 20 minutes to take us through some slides, and then we'll get into our first panel discussion. So thanks so much, Diane, for joining us.
Thanks, Kat. If I'll just share my screen. So hopefully you can all see this. I'm going to take you through, as Kat said, some of the key trends that we've seen throughout 2020 and what this is likely or may well mean for 2021. Before I do that, I thought I would just give you a little bit of a resume about Springboard, because I'm not sure how much you all know about what we do and who we are. We were established in 2002. I'm one of the 2 founding directors, and our whole raison d'etre is all about data and insights on customers, either in retail stores or hospitality or in destinations, and very often both in the same place. We're also the UK's leading commentator on bricks and mortar retail. So hopefully you will have seen us in the press. We cover the entire retail landscape, and what we essentially do is collect primary data on footfall. So that's the volume of customer activity in our destinations around the UK, and of course increasingly abroad as well. We cover the entire UK. We've got around 600 retail destinations covered in the UK, which encompasses 4,500 individual counting points. And the location of all our devices that collects this data, and it's collecting it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is very carefully organised. And we had quite a detailed strategy about how we were going, where we were going to put our counting locations. So we actually do correlate very, very closely with retail spending. So we're a really good measure of what is happening in retail. We also collect data on sales, and we do that at a UK level, but across 11 different retail categories. So we're probably the only people that collect data on bricks and mortar sales as opposed to total retail sales, which also helps us understand whether that footfall is being translated into money in the till. I'm often asked, what is the importance of footfall? One of the questions I got asked on Radio 4 once was, well, surely footfall is irrelevant now because we all shop online. Well, 1, we don't all shop online even now, but 2, of course, it's still highly relevant. And then before the pandemic, 80% of spend was still in store. And what we've identified is that there's a very, very strong correlation between how many people are in a place and how much spend is in a place. And that correlation is about 78%. So very, very strong correlation. So essentially what retail businesses need are people. We work with a range of clients from leading destinations such as Times Square in New York and the West End of London, large multiple retailers, but also some smaller retailers that you may not have heard of. People like Rutland Cycling, for instance. They're a very strong cycling retailer. They've a really success story of the pandemic. And someone called Bird Blend, who make bespoke teas. So a whole range of different people use our services. I mentioned that we're the leading commentator on retail. Hopefully you'll have seen us in the media, but we cover all of the leading press and print and broadcast titles, and regularly asked to give a view as to what is happening now and what may happen in the future. We publish insights and reviews. We're just about to publish our annual review for 2020, so keep an eye out for that. And many of these are free of charge to download direct from our website, so feel free to please dip in and take what you need. We also work with government and academia. We're very proud to work with MMU, who are a sponsor of today's event. And we've been working with MMU for a number of years. We undertook a major project looking at town centres and how to future-proof town centres. And we're also a member of the High Streets Task Force. We're a data partner for the High Streets Task Force. The Office of National Statistics publishes our data each week, and also we work with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So our data is really strongly used as an indicator of economic activity. So what I'll do now is take you through what's happened in 2020. But before I do that, I just want to give some context, really, because that is absolutely key to where we are now. So this slide here shows the footfall trend from 2008 through to 2019, where we thought we were being heavily impacted and we were losing a lot of footfall. And actually, we were losing around 1.5% of footfall in retail destinations each year, slightly more in high streets, around 2% in high streets, but actually quite a minimal amount if we think about what we've lost this year. But over that period, high streets had lost over 20% of footfall. So 1 in 5 fewer people were shopping in high streets than they before 2008. So that's a significant proportion of people. And the question is, why is this? Well, clearly one of the major factors is the growth of online. And this is ONS data here, and we can see it shows that the online has increased from around about 5% of total retail spend in 2008 to around 19% in 2019. So you can see that exponential growth, and that inevitably has impacted footfall in our destinations and in our stores. We don't need to go to towns and cities and shopping centres as much, but it's also led to changes in the way we use our towns and cities. So that was life before COVID. And then we started 2020 and COVID hit. And this is essentially what happened. So this is a graph that shows footfall across the UK and all of our destinations from the first week of the year to the end of the year. And you can see that weeks 1 to 11 were pretty normal. There was a slight dip in footfall in February, but then lockdown hit in week 12. And you can see the staggering impact that had on footfall. Over the UK, footfall dropped by around 80%. And it's crept up as retail reopened. But then, of course, lockdown 2 happened, and now we're in lockdown 3. So you can see this huge impact on footfall. But it wasn't just the amount of people visiting or not visiting places that's changed. We've got some key trends that have emerged through 2020 that really are going to flow through to 2021 and beyond. One of the first trend is that retail parks were a clear winner in 2020. I mean, they are ideally set up to deal with COVID. Then only a lot of them have food stores. So of course they're open, even during lockdown, and we visit them regularly. But they're easy to get to by car, which means the reliance on public transport is less. They're wide and open. Car parking is free. The stores are large, which makes social distancing much easier. And people generally feel safer and more comfortable. So footfall in retail parks dropped by an average of 23% in 2020 versus 45% in high streets and 42% in shopping centres. So you can see the difference. But of course, that lack of footfall fled through into a drop in sales. We all know that retailers have had a tough time this year, even those that are doing well. They're trading below where they were. So in 2019, bricks and mortar sales had dropped by 3% from 2018. This year, they've dropped by 20%. So you can see the big drop. But that drop varies by category. Health and beauty has dropped by just under 9%. You know, everyone likes a good lipstick. We can buy that easily. They're essential retailers, so it makes it a lot easier. Whereas fashion, we are changed the way we live. We're not going out as much, clearly. And even when we do, it tends to be a bit more casual. That's dropped by 20%. The biggest drop has been in services, because we're doing much more of that, of course, online. At the same time of that, of course, hospitality has been massively hit, and the MPD group, who work with us very closely, they've identified that visits to eating out outlets have dropped by 43% this year. But actually, quick service restaurants, so that's our McDonald's and our Burger Kings, they've done slightly better. The third drop there, because they obviously are set up for takeaway, much easier than either full service restaurants or pubs. And pubs have had a really torrid time. Of course, a massive change and a massive trend has been this acceleration in online spending, and everyone is familiar now with the word acceleration in terms of spend, but really what we've moved so much more spending over to online. Previously, people who had never shopped online are now doing so, partly out of necessity, of course, but you know, but partly out of a desire now that they know how actually easy it is. So we've seen online spending across both food and non-food rise from 19.7% of total spend to around 38%. But interestingly, you can see here that online food shopping, despite the lockdowns, is still a relatively small proportion of total food shopping, just 11.5% in November to December, and that was with Christmas and with lockdowns. Whereas non-food, nearly a half of all spending, non-food spending, is now online. And of course, lockdowns meant that we couldn't travel very far, we couldn't visit regional cities, we're working at home a lot, so why would we go into our big cities? So that means there's been this rise of localism. We are visiting our smaller towns and cities much more than we ever did. And pre-COVID, back in 2019 and before that, it was our smaller towns and cities that were really struggling. But actually, and you can see those on the figures for these on the right-hand side, you can see that the biggest drops, although they don't seem very big anymore, were in our smallest towns. Market towns in 2019, footfall dropped by 3.7%, and in coastal towns by 3.6%, whereas in central London, footfall was virtually level, and regional cities outside London, it dropped by 1.8%. So it was the smaller towns that struggled. 2020, it was the other way. Central London and regional cities have been dealt hammer blows, particularly central London. And really, unfortunately, the elements that make central London so invincible have come to pass to make them very vulnerable this year. The heavy reliance on public transport to move people around, the huge amount of working population in volume terms, but also relative to a residential population in the city. The loss of tourism, both domestic and overseas, and also leisure. All the theatres are shut and the cinemas are shut and the restaurants are shut. All of that has been hugely detrimental to central London. So all of these factors, of course, inevitably have meant that consumer confidence has dipped, and in fact, it's worsened. It's worsened to double. So this is data gathered by GfK, and they have what they call an overall index score. And in 2019, that was -13. That isn't great. Actually, it's been declining continuously since the Brexit referendum in 2016. But last year, it worsened by -26. And mainly, that's around worries and concerns about the economy. But of course, there is an element about whether we are happy to make major purchases, and clearly people, because of the worries about the economy, are not. And that's bound up with furlough and unemployment and really prospects for the future. So a lot of insecurity around that, and that impacts retail spend enormously. So what does all this mean for 2021 and beyond 2021, in fact? What COVID has done is really brought forward a lot of the things that were already happening. And I think this is a narrative that's been spoken about a lot. But it also has created some fundamental changes that will impact on where we go in terms of our retail offer and our retail landscape. So essentially, for 2021, we have two time periods, as far as I'm concerned. We have a pre-vaccine 2021 and a post-vaccine 2021. And pre-vaccine period is where we are now. It's where the vaccine is being rolled out, but it hasn't been rolled out to a majority of the population as yet. Post-vaccine is when we have much more coverage of vaccine and retail starts to reopen, and then things will look a lot brighter. One of the key factors, of course, will be home working. How will this impact on retail? Well, that's now firmly established. I think we all recognise that we can work at home. Our companies are happy with us working at home. They know that we can be productive. So the days of traipsing into an office 5 days a week are probably over for most people. Although we love the social interaction of being in offices, actually home working works for many people. And now we have had to be set up for that. And that, of course, means that there'll be fewer trips to our larger regional cities where the big offices are. And rather than have a trip a day where we buy a sandwich or we may go out for a drink in the evening, we'll make fewer trips, but they'll have longer times. We'll make arrangements to go out to these places and spend longer in them. And then therefore that's likely to lead to a shift in what we call our peak footfall days, which tends to be Saturday, and also peak footfall times, which tends to be lunchtime. So we might see that people are working at home at lunchtime, not going out to these places, but actually the peak is in the early evening when they finish their day. Online shopping will continue. It will drop back because we've seen it drop back at the end of other lockdowns, but it will rebase at a higher level than where we started 2020, which is about 19%. So those people who have been converted to online spending, many of those will continue to do so, at least proportionate of their spending. Sorry about my slides, they keep rolling forward. Footfall inevitably, therefore, will rebase at a lower level. We're likely to see a step down in footfall. Where it sits at the moment, we are not willing to forecast because we're still in this lockdown period. But where we were losing 1.5%, 2% a year, we're likely to see maybe a drop to 5 or 10% debt below that. One of the key things that, you know, I talked about, this increased localism, this growth of localism. If anything, if there's any upside of COVID, it is the fact that we have this newfound loyalty to smaller local centres. For years and years and years, it was the smaller centres that were struggling, losing shoppers to bigger towns and bigger cities and bigger shopping malls. But actually, during lockdowns and restrictions, we've rediscovered our local high streets. They've been more resilient. They've lost less footfall. And this actually is likely to continue because we'll be working at home, because we'll still be cautious. There will still be restrictions for quite a long time. So our smaller centres will benefit from that. But on the upside, there will be an initial surge to stores and destinations post-vaccine, in the post-vaccine period. We're all desperate to get out and see people and to have that social interaction and connection. So we're anticipating that actually stores and destinations will have this initial boom when we're allowed to, when we're released from our lockdown and we're allowed to go shopping again. But retail will have to compete with hospitality, travel and leisure for our spend. We're desperate to see our family and friends. We're desperate to go on holiday. We're desperate to have a meal out. All of those things, if you're spending money on those things, you then can't or won't have the money to spend necessarily on buying product in retail stores. And lastly, of course, what we need to be aware of is unemployment and the end of the furlough scheme. We've seen unemployment rise already, and this is likely to rise further as furlough scheme ends. It's due to end at the end of April. It will be interesting to see whether that actually does happen. But even if it doesn't and it rolls forward, unemployment will continue to rise, and that may act as a brake upon some spending. But overall, a cautious optimism for 2021. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that gives you a feel for where we might be as we come out of this lockdown.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dan. That's really, really interesting. And I think, you know, a lot of those topics we're going to pull through into the panel discussions. I just wanted to pick up quickly. We did have one question in the chat during that from Ben Ward, and it's probably something that actually we'll talk about maybe with Craig as well later, but it'd be interesting just to touch on this before we move into the first panel. From your perspective, Diane, was around, Ben was asking, is the shift to online in sort of traditional supermarket retail less because a lot of people actually struggle to get online, which actually plays quite well to the two discussions we're talking about, you know, technology and obviously the increase in people thinking about online shopping, particularly their supermarket shop. Was that potentially one area that maybe the supermarkets weren't quick enough to kind of put that capacity in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was definitely, I mean, that was a break on the growth of online food spending. Definitely. They couldn't get enough delivery drivers. They couldn't get enough slots. They couldn't organise quickly enough. I mean, you have to have some sympathy with them because they were hit hard by the pandemic as much as anyone else.
Definitely.
And trying to recruit a whole network of delivery drivers overnight and also give them vans to deliver in. You know, you might have the drivers, but you don't actually have the vans. And they have to be trained and pass regulations and all of those things. So yes, inevitably there will have been a pullback on that. But even, you know, even before the pandemic, when delivery slots were readily available, we never really saw a huge growth in food spending online. The growth was always much more about non-food spending. So even there where the capacity was there, it wasn't really happening. And actually, I think two people do want to touch and feel and see what they're buying in terms of food. So whilst, you know, when the delivery slots were available, it grew a little bit, but not a massive amount. So I think that the smaller proportion of food shopping will remain.
Fantastic. And just one question before we move on to our first panel. In terms of these trends that we're then seeing, you're obviously looking at UK footfall figures in that analysis. We're obviously, I think one thing we have come quick out the marks of, and actually I was on the call yesterday with some of my colleagues over in Germany and Austria, and they were saying, wow, actually the vaccine's rolling out pretty fast in the UK. So do we see the trends that you're predicting with a cautious optimism? Are they at the moment very UK focused, or do we think that that pattern will be reflected more globally as well?
The trends I was talking about here are UK focused.
Yeah.
But, and there are slight nuances with the continent, particularly around their loyalty to face-to-face shopping and their usage of smaller towns. And we are more online savvy in the UK. A greater proportion of people shop online in the UK than they do in the States, definitely. And when we were about 19%, they were about 13% online. And obviously distance makes a big difference there. So I think there's differences definitely between the UK and the States, but also the UK and the continent. And the continental shoppers are much more loyal to actually their local towns and cities and going into, and they're much more about going into towns and cities and spending time in those towns and cities even than we are. So they are so the trends I'm identifying in the UK will probably be with trends with knobs on in the continent almost.
Yeah, and reason to be optimistic in the US after the inauguration yesterday as well. So maybe some cautious optimism from a political sense as well. Anyway, thank you so much, Dan. I think someone's also requested if we'd able to share those slides, which I'm sure you'd be very happy to do. And I know there's more information about Springboard on there as well. So thanks so much for kicking off with that really useful insight. I'd like to then welcome my second panel, who everybody should know who is on this panel, but if they wouldn't mind switching their cameras on. So I'm really delighted to be able to welcome Richard Johnson, who's the CEO of My Street app, which is really interesting because it's actually an app that's been born during the pandemic and has been designed to help connect retailers beyond their traditional patch and really bringing together both technology, but also the parts of, some of what Diane was just talking about, some of the parts of retail that we love and enjoy and the reason we go to our high street. Delighted to welcome also Kushala Somasundaram, which I hope I've done justice to there on pronunciation, from Square UK, who again, an absolutely fantastic business who has helped independents, obviously it's a very traditional bricks and mortar business, be able to transact in a cashless environment, but also help them integrate that offer online. We've also on this panel got Gabrielle Haza, who is the CEO of Solbury Advisory. So she has worked with a huge amount of businesses from Sweaty Betty to Knomo, and also is a non-exec director to a Manchester-based ski retailer called Planks Clothing. So a challenging sector, not just from retail, but also travel at the moment. And then finally, Ian Cairns, who joins us from Talk Business. So again, really interesting to get Ian's perspective about kind of facilitating access to technology and business solutions for businesses from big, small, medium, and everything in between. So thank you all so much for joining me. Just before we dive into some of the specific kind of trends and issues, and to pick up on a couple of things that Diane has talked about, I think one of the words Diane talked about was acceleration. And I think obviously both acceleration and adaptation have been kind of fundamental to both businesses and consumers over the last year. I think, what we've obviously seen is a lot of technologies were already in existence. So, Zoom was in existence, click and collect was a big part of people's retail programs, but a lot of this has been kind of driven by, as Diane talked about, people who'd maybe never transacted online before or shopped online or just shopping in different ways. And I think that's what's been interesting is not just from a customer's perspective, but we've seen a huge demise in a lot of big household names who, again, when you look at the commentary around of it, it was a lot about a lack of investment into kind of their digital infrastructures and innovation. So, we've lost a lot of heritage and kind of well-loved brands over the last year. But equally on the flip side, and if we look at GM-based businesses, Boohoo, in spite of a bit of a brand reputation scandal in the summer, they've just recorded 40% uplift in sales in the last 4 months. And again, a platform business like the Hut Group have just had phenomenal success. So I guess my question, and reflecting some of the trends that Diana's already talked about, is, are we actually seeing, retail isn't in crisis, but physical only retail maybe is? So I'd like to start off, not to put you on the spot, Rich, but I thought I'd come to you first to just say, Can you just tell us a little bit about My Street, and also, how has innovation been so critical for you, I guess, to launch this app, but also what it's meant to your customers?
Yeah, so hi everyone. So yeah, as Kat said, I'm the co-founder of a new proposition called My Street. And My Street was, it was something that was in development for a while as we pre-COVID, and it's something that we've been thinking about for a long time. And what we are launching is the first ever conversational commerce platform. And what we mean by that is some of my frustrations with online commerce are I like to be able to ask questions, I like to be able to talk to people, and I love going to the high street. I live in a town where we have an amazing high street. And it's this idea that actually that we believe that every consumer, and it's fundamental to our business, we believe every consumer is unique and everyone wants a unique experience. And actually e-commerce has changed that in that, I go onto Amazon, I buy something, I transact, I leave, and off I go again. And I think what we're doing as a business is we want to bring that uniqueness back and bring that conversation back between independent retailers, independent creators and consumers. To get that personalized service, to get that understanding. And, we're not the only tech business doing this. I'd love it if we were, but we're not. We're seeing WhatsApp for Business, we're seeing Go in Store really innovating in sort of the appointments, online appointments. And what we're seeing is sort of this divergence into technologies, which is artificial intelligence, computer vision, visual calls such as Zoom, this idea of being able to use technology to power person-to-person communication and that personalization. And as we've gone through the pandemic, we've seen more and more of that happening, and more of us actually adapting to use it. We had a online consultation with Volvo to look at a new car the other day, which I could never say was on my list of things to do. So it's been really interesting, and that's sort of the trends that we're following at My Street.
Fantastic. And I think definitely some of those trends, particularly, as I said, things like VR, I think will be really interesting to see how that's going to be used, because obviously the technology has moved on, that what we've got in the palm of our hand, whereas QR codes, I can remember being a sort of bit of a thing you'd put in a marketing campaign because you thought it was good 10 years ago, whereas it's actually proved to be such a valuable piece of technology. So I wanted to then come to Kushala to talk about Square, because probably similar to what Rich has just talked about, a lot of your business and focus in the pandemic has been really using your technology to allow those more sort of traditional bricks and mortar retailers to stay connected to their customers as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, thank you for Manchester for inviting Square to speak, and really delighted to be here. Actually, this is really good. So in terms of Square, and I think for those who probably don't know much about the company, we were co-founded in the US actually about 11 years ago, founded by Jack Dorsey, who's also the CEO of Twitter. And one of the first products actually when we launched, and Richard, I can sort of relate to some of the things you've just said, it was like one of these sort of little white card readers, right, which you'll see still in very many of our sellers' stores. And that was really to allow the small business to have access to payments. Essentially, that was the genesis of that. And then since then, we've built an ecosystem of financial tools. So that's across, as Kat mentioned, all the way from, and supporting all types of businesses really in all sizes, online and in person. So very much, similar to what Diane said, we've been in the industry from, since about March 2017. So it's 4 years running, but particularly in the height of pandemic in the last 12 months, we have seen our sellers and businesses especially really facing some unique challenges is probably how I would put it. In fact, when I started at Square at the start of the lockdown, and I've seen through these changes that are coming through, and a lot of the things that we really had to do, it's really to work with the sellers, to listen to them every day, constantly sort of figuring out a way to actually help them pivot from wherever they are, right? Some of the businesses were already online, some of them were only in person, some of them wanted a mix. And for us, fundamentally, to all of that has been the sort of offering the customers, which has always been the case for Square, is the omni-channel proposition, right? So you should be able to do business, whether you are in a market stall, or whether if you're in a big sort of retail store, or whether you are actually online, we should be able to offer them the solutions. So that's really been the premise of what we've been doing. And one of the things probably to highlight, and very much like I guess Richard also you said, you reacted to a market in the time when it was needed the most. So very similar to that, Square, what we did was we looked at our product features and what was coming up on the roadmap. We actually reprioritized it straight away based on what the customers needed, and really then looked to really try and very quickly launch some of these products in the market as soon as we could. So that's what we've seen. So listening to the customers, reacting quickly, and prioritizing some of the features that we had to get into the market.
I think we're definitely going to come back to some of those topics you've put out there around flexibility and prioritization, because I think, whatever size of business you are, that's been a big, things that you thought you were going to be planning this time last year have completely shifted. And, I'm going to say pivot. I've already said unprecedented, so I might go for the full gambit. So coming to you then, Gabrielle, in terms of then the businesses you work with and advise for, does some of the trends that we've already chatted on there really play to business? And I particularly think omni-channel and kind of those multiple touch points being so important, because I think the days are dead of kind of either businesses or shoppers being kind of in an online camp only or a bricks and mortar camp only. So it would be really interesting to hear from your perspective, from the businesses you work with, what are those trends you've seen as well?
Well, like a lot of people who say that COVID has been an accelerant and not necessarily a sea change, an entire change, I've absolutely seen that in the businesses that I work with. I work with a variety of types of business models, from online only to much more traditional retailers that are fundamentally bricks and mortar, but might have invested some money in e-commerce along the way. And when the pandemic hit, what they see is that 20% of their sales and 20% of their spending is for e-commerce, where the rest of the business is really focused on bricks and mortar. And all of a sudden, they've had to do a complete and utter pivot in terms of understanding how to deploy their internal resources, identifying completely where their skills gaps are, which are really large. I mean, the fact that they've noticed that digital was only ever a silo and not really part of a skill set across the entire business, that's been a real reckoning for them, as it should be. We've been saying this for years and years, and only when their major channel has been completely closed off are they realizing that actually they're quite vulnerable if they don't have more of a digital mindset throughout the entire business. So it's not that they have not been digital, but it's that digital has always been an afterthought. And now the focus is entirely on digital first, which again is not to say that omnichannel is, I think omnichannel is absolutely the most important way to be. Customers want to shop